biggest challenge for unions in 2018 and beyond, there are so many challenges that we're facing: casualisation, outsourcing. The thing that our union is really focused on is being able to bargain at an industry level. We find that our employers are always trying to have that race to the bottom, contract out, and don't take any responsibility at all. So we think one of the rules that has to be changed is that we should be able to bargain with who's actually got the power, who's actually making the decisions.
What's exciting, though, is if you look at what the ACTU has done, and particularly under Sally's leadership, she has been a real game changer, and it really demonstrates and kind of puts kind of hope out there that if you make a big decision and you resource it, that it can have an impact that's quite substantial, and that should give all unions confidence that putting a big idea out there, putting a big plan together and resourcing it is something that is what we should be doing, but also something that we can be doing. And I think that that's, for me, one of the really exciting things about the ACTU campaign.
Change the rules is about a point in time. The rules are really stuffed. They're really stacked against us at the moment, and we've got an opportunity with an election to get some commitments out of the different political parties to come in and change the rules. But what we actually need is to change the rules so that, and we in our union talk about jobs that you can count on. A job that you can count on is one where you know next week and next month and next year that you'll still have the same hours that you have today, that you'll get a decent pay increase. And the only way that we're going to build the structures that we need is by building strong unions and building strong coalitions across unions and across countries to make sure that that happens. So I remember, and I'm sure lots of people here do, the Rights at Work campaign, and we put in so much energy into that, and we changed the rules, and then we sat back and we let it go. And I was one of the people that was part of that, and you guys were too, and we have to take those lessons. We have to make sure that our unions are really strong, that all of our members and all of our potential members and our workers and our families know what is really at stake here. And it's a big ask, right? It's not going to be easy because it's in their interest to not let us do it. But I think that fundamentally changing the rules isn't the issue. It's about building a much stronger movement that keeps on fighting for that stuff.
The biggest challenge facing our movement is to rebuild a sense in society as a whole of what unions are and what we're here for, and rebuild, in a way, the social license. You know, if I can use Shannon's term from her presentation, the social license of unions. They have succeeded in degrading the image of unions over the last 30 or 40 years with all these attacks. And from time to time, we haven't helped them ourselves in that regard. So rebuilding the idea that union is a collective instrument that helps all workers, not just union members, address that fundamental inequality in society. And we play an essential role, an economic role, as well as a political and social role. That way, we shift the mindset of society as a whole of what unions are about. And it's much more than just the next election, for sure. It's about changing how society views unions and building a recognition that unions are an essential part of a normal society. You'd never believe that if you just read The Australian, right? Since coming here, I'm amazed at how often unions get on the front page of the papers, right? But it's usually just to try and tar us, right? So we have to communicate to every Australian that whether they're in the union or not, their chances in life depend on having a strong union movement.
Which is all a way of saying that this is about power, right? The stronger we are, the better we mobilise for the election, the more we're in a position to demand and hold people accountable if we do the hold the accountable piece. But, there's different pieces of this. The political piece is really important because it lays the foundation. It sends a very clear message about what it means to operate in Australia, what you can get away with. And you can see that, over the last 10 to 15 years, that particularly with collective bargaining in your own industries, that employers have become more aggressive. And there are some that are always going to be out there. They're going to be the leaders, right? They're going to try stuff. You think about Rio Tinto up in the Pilbara, 18 years ago, the RTBU members up there were some of the first to be attacked as part of that very aggressive. And others saw that and they're like, you know what? They got away with that. We'll try it too. So it's kind of contagious, right? And that sort of epidemic gets worse as it goes along. Changing the rules is one part of that. But as others have said, if we don't have a strong workplace culture that's about fighting back at the workplace, you can change whatever you want in terms of the legislation, but we'll fall flat. I think also that and this has been raised a lot in the Change the Rules campaign, is that if you look at unions' focus, when you are trapped in a cycle of collective bargaining, for some unions that's every 18 months, you have little time to do anything else except, kind of feed the machine that is collective bargaining. And that means that unions have not a lot of scope left to do the kinds of things that Jim's talking about to demonstrate relevance beyond any one workplace, because we are just, all of our resources, all of our best people are tied up in constant negotiations. And what's remarkable to me is why any employer would want to subject themselves to that kind of environment, because if we don't think it's much fun, they can't possibly think that being stuck in a room with us for 12 of every 18 months is a great way to run their business. So they're not even acting in their own interest. Fighting with militant unions is not a fun thing to do. We think the fighting bit is fun because that's our core business, right? But if you're a rail operator, if you're a port operator, fighting the union then becomes the number one thing you do to make money, and that's ridiculous. It just goes against any of the kind of widely held wisdom about how you run a good business based on innovation and supporting good employees. So, I think the power stuff is important, but the other thing I think is just really, really essential, and anyone who's been an organiser knows this is true, is that we also need a bit of hope that we can change the environment that we're in. Because if you look at those 4 figures, which I'd never seen them put like that, and they're quite confronting, Jim, around, the kind of 4 reasons why frankly, the 4 reasons why we're fucked, which is that kind of falling density. That is the technical term. And I did economics, so that was a term. If I was sitting in one of your classes, I probably would have learned, but you might have done it with a rap. I'm not going to embarrass myself. But, falling density, the collapse of EBAs in the private sector, the removal of the right to strike and reduce of wage growth, you got to put a bit of hope out there that, workers standing together can win. There's a lot of value in changing the legislation because of changing the environment, but also gives people a collective experience that isn't about fighting their boss at their workplace where they're one of 10 people. It gives them an experience of the union movement when we all stand together for something that's bigger than my workplace, than the kind of what's raining down on me every day, that I stand with other workers. It can be, if we run that right, the truest expression of our union values, because we're all standing together for something that just doesn't affect me because I'm a union member. It affects everybody, as Jim spoke about, but it also is something that I can talk to my family members about, which isn't just how much I'm going to get in my enterprise agreement. And I think that, if that was the only reason, which is not, has value on its own, because that is contagious as well. Because I think what you'll see is if we can win the next election, we can hold Labor accountable, we can get better laws that are just more human than the ones that we have now, then we will start to see people feeling more confident about the way that we do our union business in other areas. And I think that's something that will be really exciting to watch.
In home care, which is one area that we cover, it's providing care to people in their own homes, the elderly and disabled people, so they can live at home. So you don't have a workplace. Your workplace is 5 or 10 different people's homes in your community. And that used to be run by the New South Wales government, was outsourced, as you say. One of the things that we've done there is built a really strong union in the cloud on that crazy thing called Facebook. We've got a group of over 600 care workers. You only get to be in this group if you're a member of the union. The people that administer that group are delegates of the union. They provide advice to people, they provide information. People join because they know this is where you get the real facts. And so even though we haven't been able to get together in a group to, in person, we're finding ways to build solidarity using these new technologies. So I think that that's one way of kind of thinking outside the square a bit, and those women in that care work are really supporting each other and building their union through that process.
I agree with you. The stuff around automation is frightening to me because of what I've seen in relation to port workers. Similarly for in your industries, there are some real, there should be real concerns about that, which is why I go back to what I said in the presentation around there should be a higher social licence to operate. And I know from the discussions that I've had around different campaigns that that when a company comes to invest in Australia, and you look at, again, ICTSI, how on earth could a company that does business with the Kabila regime get to operate the third port in Melbourne? And the irony of that is that we had a big dispute there in December over the fact that one worker couldn't get a security card. Now, for me, the worker ended up getting a security card, so it was a total beat up. But what's ridiculous to me is that So one guy can't get a security card, so the whole union gets sort of demonised. He did get the card. But a company can do business with some of the worst regimes in the world, fuel some of the fastest profit that we're seeing in the stevedoring industry, and they get to come to operate a key asset in Victoria. In my mind, that's not okay. That's union business, right? And that's union business because if you know how to operate in Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, you've got a kind of set of industrial relations skills that are going to make you probably less sensitive to the nuance of industrial relations in Australia. And what the problem with that, for me, is that that then sets an even lower bar for other employers because like Rio Tinto, they say, oh, well, if they can get away with that, why wouldn't I? Because you're going to make more money, right? So we need to tie our political program to putting bigger arse and ensuring that the due diligence that's done on companies when they come to operate in Australia, particularly when they're getting government contracts, particularly when they're operating key assets or there's some form of government regulation needed, like the Gorgon project, that we put a higher ask on those companies. That is absolutely union business. It is extraordinary to me that a company that when we first had discussions about Chevron and we were saying they're not paying any tax, they are not employing local people. And you would think that with one of the world's largest LNG construction facilities that you would see a boom in the steel industry in Western Australia. Actually, what you saw was the collapse in the steel industry because almost all of the steel came out of the ground in Australia, went to Korea to be manufactured, came back to Australia. We repaired it because the specs weren't right. But it is just disgusting that you could have a project that's worth $50 to $60 billion and we don't have a growth in the steel industry in Australia and we haven't educated and trained a whole new generation of apprentices under that system. We need to be demanding more. And to get back to your question, Giovanna, that's why, because when we have more power, we can demand more. And when we demand more, we get closer to the kind of society that Jim's talking about, where we do have more equality. Because we have to set new standards about what it means to operate in Australia and what it's reasonable to expect when you live in this country. And that's not about being a nationalist and excluding other people. Because I can give you my word, I've organised in Africa and in Asia and in Papua New Guinea, and every single place I go to, those workers say to me their number one issue is to get a job in the country in which they live when there are job opportunities going around. And so if that's true in everywhere that I go, it should also be true and okay in Australia for us to say that if you come to operate in this country, there should be a set of standards that you operate by where you can't export out the jobs to the lowest common denominator, that if you are going to use technology that's going to change the makeup of the workforce, that we should have some negotiation around that. It should be a negotiation where there's some form of trust, not like Patrick, where they, completely do us over, and that there are standards in that reflect community values. And we are the community, and we probably have to do a better job to let people know that union values are community values, so that becomes part of the narrative, and so we can feed that more easily into what the campaigning that we're doing. But I guess to finish, what I'd say is we're starting from a bit of a deficit because the Conservatives have done a much better job of demonising us and saying that we are islands of militancy, that workers like yours are out there for a small group of relatively well-paid workers, and that we don't reflect the rest of the community because they want something else. We know that's not true, right? And so we have to do a better job of saying, as Jim said, that our values are community values, and when we win, everybody wins.
I think this comes back to what Shannon said earlier about technology and negotiation. We're neither for nor against technology. Technology is just human ideas of how to do stuff. The question is what kind of stuff and in whose interests and how are the costs and benefits of it all going to be shared. So we're neither for nor against technology. We do have to have the power to influence how technology is applied and how it affects our work lives, including our compensation, our job security, and our working conditions. And this big brother aspect that we're seeing to technology in many workplaces is one of the most insidious dimensions of it that really highlights Shannon's point about the need to negotiate all this. Employers have always faced a choice in managing their workers between the carrot and the stick, okay? It's almost like they think that we're donkeys, okay? And we got the carrot in front that they dangle, the positive inducement of a good wage, possible promotion, job security, and the negative inducement, the stick at the other end, which is the threat of discipline up to and including dismissal, okay? The choice between carrots and sticks for employers depends on all kinds of things, including how much the carrots cost versus how much the sticks cost. If they had to hire asshole foremen to follow you around on your job all the time to monitor what you do, right? That's going to be expensive for them. So they use more of the inducements, the positive inducements. If, on the other hand, they can use cheap technology, whether that's CCTV cameras that are everywhere, right, or GPS on everybody's phone or everyone's vehicle, or other electronic things that monitor the pace of your work or even which way your face is looking at different points in time, suddenly the stick looks a lot cheaper than the carrot does. And this is an insidious dimension of technological change, which is the use of electronic surveillance, monitoring, and discipline devices. The worst case you see is like Uber drivers who can lose their job without ever talking to a human being just because they didn't get enough 4-star or 5-star ratings from the customers who rated them after their rides. And we know, the evidence is clear, customers will rate people based on the color of their skin, not the quality of their service. And the whole idea that you could lose your livelihood, not a great livelihood, but lose your livelihood just purely because of electronic monitoring like that, with no due process, no multi-step discipline process like we would be used to, is incredible. So keep a sharp eye on this iPhone piece of it, not just the question of whose work gets displaced by it, but how the information that's gathered is going to be used, and make sure that you're protecting the normal processes of any kind of surveillance, monitoring, evaluation, discipline, because it's something that employers are using everywhere as a cheap way to try and enforce labor discipline. And the flip side of the coin is they're going to be less concerned with decent pay if they can monitor you like a big brother.
Technology can be used like that, but we should actually think about how we can use it to build our power too. And there's a couple of trials that we're doing in United Voice. One is called Hospo Voice in Victoria. We're getting hospitality workers, people that work in bars and clubs, to rate their boss. And then you can go online and see whether that's a good place to work or whether that's a bar that you would want to go spend some money at if the workers are being mistreated. So this rating system can be used against bosses in the same way that they try and use it against those Uber drivers. And we've just launched a new app with artificial intelligence, so a robot that's training itself to answer industrial advice at the casino. And at the Star City Casino, it's 24 hours operation, and often workers don't get an opportunity to talk to each other, to ring the union office. And this technology is a way that people can ask questions about their rights, about what's going on, and connect with other workers again. So I'd say you can also think about how we use technology to build our own power.
I think that unions don't use safety enough at all. Blanket statement, don't. I think and not because we want to use it as some kind of flippant kind of industrial strategy, is that is a place where we have enshrined rights, and that's more difficult to take away. And it's quite shocking to me when I go to other places. We're doing some work in Indonesia at the moment for one of the ports where they're an incredibly militant union. They stand up to the employer. They often stand up to the police there. They're amazing. They don't have any safety culture at all. And it made me realise that where unions in Australia used to have very strong safety cultures within unions as a key part of the work that the union did, that doesn't exist to the extent that it did before. And I think that, particularly to pick up your point, there are new challenges facing us that are happening. The generations of technology are changing so quickly now that we need people who are onto the kinds of things that you're talking about what is the impact. And it may not be an impact because somebody's, the kind of problems that we saw before. It may be there are clear mental health implications about being monitored 24 hours a day. And I think that that is something as unions we need to be aware of. And, for your union in particular, you've got, a high proportion of blokes, is that we know that the stats say that they're less likely to, seek treatment. All of those things is that we need to be aware of the potential problems and raising that stuff early so that we have, a voice in that. But to go back to one of the earlier points I made, what we've seen in the stevedoring industry is that often, no, I won't say always, often, technology gets introduced in a low-trust environment, which means that people are right to be concerned about heavy surveillance and the impact that that's going to have on their own mental health, the kind of work that they do, the intensity of work. And anyone who's been around for about 20 years will know that in the early 90s, there was actually a very big focus on the intensity of work. And Jim, you probably know this stuff. I worked at Sydney Uni at the time, and for a place called ACERT, and we did that was what we did. All the work that we did was around the impact of casualisation on the workforce, the impact, a lot of stuff in the mining industry, people who've been around for a long time might know, the health and safety impacts of the changing nature of work. That body of work has gone, and we need that analysis more than ever because the workplace is mutating faster than ever because of the impacts of technology. So I absolutely agree with you, but I think there's a union movement-wide analysis that needs to be done about the impact of technology and the changing nature of work and the health and safety impacts of that.
I totally agree with what Shannon said on your point. The cleaning industry, one of our industries, is more dangerous than construction. And what happens is that people are working on their own and it's overuse injuries, and it's because they don't have enough time to do the job and they're under pressure and they feel that they're going to lose their job and they don't have any power. The home care workers that I talked about earlier, they're going into people's homes. There's no health and safety assessment of each individual home when they have to lift people, they have to get them into showers. And these people are caring people that are providing a really valuable service, but they don't have the courage to go, this isn't good enough. So my call out to strong unions like yours is that when you're talking to your kids and to your wives and to the other people in the community, it is about saying it's okay to say no in these situations. You can get your union involved, but I think you're right, we'd need to do a lot of work in that area. When I hear Scott Morrison say there is no inequality or wages are growing, and then I go to a meeting like this of our members and they tell me that they have to do 3 jobs to earn about $49,000 a year, and they've got no hope that they're ever going to, that their kids are going to get a mortgage, that they're going to keep going, that if they lose some hours, that's actually the difference. They're starting to get the shits, right? People are starting to get angry. What we have a responsibility to do is to bring people together. And my problem is that I don't have big workplaces where people naturally come together. So using new technologies, getting out there, having a conversation in community. We and the RTBU New South Wales are part of the Sydney Alliance. It's a community coalition with other community groups, with church groups, people that I wouldn't normally talk to. I'm out there talking and making sure they're hearing what's going on in the world and that they actually start to stand in solidarity with us. So, yeah, we need to get a whole lot more radical.
I totally agree. It kind of goes back to my first point, though, is that I speak to lots of union leaders around the world, and people are grappling with the same thing, but then they're sitting on lots and lots of assets. And so what I do say to union leaders is, it's raining now. Now is the time to invest. When you're sitting at 9%, density in the private sector, I'm not sure how much further density needs to fall before people are like, no, now's the time, because there's a critical point when people are saying we're almost there where it's almost too late, So now is the time that we get to make a decision about whether we are going to be organisations that are adaptable, creative, nimble, that can survive for the longer term, or whether we are going to continue to represent the workers that we've got. And I go lots of places around the world, I say the same thing. It's not the most popular conversation, but I say to people, how much do you actually invest in, do you have a growth plan, and how much money is behind it? And how much money is behind the growth plan compared to how much money is in the plan for, the other servicing obligations of the union? It's not a new, people have been asking this for a long time, but at 9% density, for me, I say to people, now is the time to get very good plans together, tested plans that your members endorse, and go out to resource them, because my experience of running campaigns is they fall apart for 2 reasons, and usually only for 2 reasons. The first one is that there's not enough leadership buy-in. So you're someone who's got a really good campaign idea. You put every bit of passion you've got into it. I've been this person. And you think, if I just worked hard enough, I could just get it over the line, right? Because I could mobilise. Or they fall apart because they don't have enough resources. I think that Australian unions do not spend enough money on campaigns. They just don't. They do not. And if you look at the kind of money that's going into the Change the Rules campaign, look what impact that's had with the investment that's been made to date. And every union leader I work with, my big 3 things now are, how much political support are you going to put behind this campaign? And do you see this work as central to the future of the union? Because if they can't answer that question with a yes, then it's not important, right? The second thing is, are you prepared to resource it at a level that will allow us to win? Not to have a go, but to actually win. And I think I've got a pretty good sense about what that looks like now, and it's way more than we've ever spent before. But my experience is that when you front load campaigns with resources, then you have a fighting chance of winning. And the third thing is having the right people working on the campaign. And that's often people that we haven't had before, people with different skill sets, not to replace but to supplement the people that are in existing unions. We need to staff up our campaign units and give them the chance to win. And I think then you'll start to see the kinds of things that you're talking about.
Well, I thought your question where you said you were really inspired by Mel and Shannon's discussion of campaigns, and then you heard The Economist. So that happened to me once before too. I was speaking to an AEU event, and guess who the first two speakers were? Sharon Burrow and Sally McManus. So what luck, and then me. And somebody actually tweeted, it was so fabulous to hear from two titans of the union movement, Sharon Burrow and Sally McManus. And Jim Stanford was good for an economist, is what it said. So, but we take our responsibility as being the grim reapers of delegate education seriously. But anyways, the question's absolutely valid, and I don't think there's a contradiction between fighting to change the rules and being radical. In fact, that set of rules that we're fighting to change is pretty darn radical. We've got a renovation in that set of rules that's very far-reaching, including sector-wide bargaining, pattern bargaining, multi-employer agreements, the ability to collect revenues from everyone who benefits from an agreement rather than the free riding that's totally endorsed in today's laws, and so on. So if we can win that, and it will be won first and foremost in the battle of public opinion, and then the politicians will come chasing after it, we'll be on a good path to getting more radical, absolutely.